Thank you so much. Let me just start by saying thank you, Leah, and thank you for the kind words, and thank you, Ezra. It has been such an honor to fight alongside you two for the past 3 years and to fight alongside everybody in Indivisible, both to beat Donald Trump and even more urgently to save our democracy. And that's what this is about. We are in an unprecedented crisis. The coronavirus has drastically altered life as we know it. Lives and livelihoods are on the line, and that means this is the most important election of our lives. No one should be forced to choose between casting their vote and protecting their health. You said it exactly right on this, Ezra. Last month, I laid out steps that our leaders need to take to protect our elections during the coronavirus crisis. I believe if you want to get something done, you ought to have a plan. So it's expanded vote by mail, including mailing every registered voter a ballot that is postage prepaid, that we have safer in-person voting locations, and that we expand early voting periods. There's more to it than that. We can talk about it later, but those are kind of the top lines. But here's the thing. Republicans are chomping at the bit to exploit this pandemic and to double down on voter suppression. That means we have to fight even harder for our democracy. So, Warren Democrats have teamed up with Indivisible to demand safe voting in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and Puerto Rico. And today I'm asking you, please join us in this fight. Go to elizabethwarren.com/democracy. Find the ways that you can join the fight from wherever you live, because together, by fighting for expanded vote by mail and safer in-person voting, we can guard the beating heart of our democracy. That's why we're here.
Thank you, and thank you again for joining us today. So now we'll go to questions. We've got questions from across the country, but first let's start with the basics. Could you tell us about how the federal government gets a say in how state governments handle elections?
Sure, it's right there in the Constitution. The federal government has the power to regulate federal elections. Now, I understand different states have different needs, but every voter should be able to vote by mail if that's what they want to do. And let's understand, we have actually started making progress on this. The bill that came out of the House, it's called the HEROES Act, has provided for vote by mail nationwide. We should make sure that those provisions are carried through into the final bill. It's essential. Every American citizen should have a chance to vote. And this is one way to guarantee that chance. Not the only way, but one way.
That's great. Thank you. Well, we know mail-in voting is very important. We also know that traditionally many voters of color prefer in-person voting, and that there are real concerns about access to the vote by mail for communities of color. And in the meantime, the number of polling places have been shrinking in communities of color, often because of targeted campaigns by Republicans to suppress their votes. What can federal legislation do to address this?
So the way I start on this is that voting is the beating heart of our democracy. If Americans are forced to choose between their health and staying safe and exercising their right to vote, then democracy as we know it will be lost. So online registration, voting by mail, these are important steps in protecting voters during this pandemic. But those policies alone will not protect everyone. States must also be prepared to assist those voters, any voters, who need or want to vote in person. And so that's why part of this package is to strengthen it all. And that is to enhance the safety of in-person voting and expand early voting so that people have more access. It's also about providing hazard pay and personal protective equipment and plenty of care for poll workers so they can be there and they can be safe. We also need to put in place protections to ensure that individuals who vote by mail don't have their ballots discounted or thrown out without justification. So we got a lot of pieces here, and we need to do more. So these are the places where we're starting in the House bill and the provision I put forward. But I just want to put on the line, when I'm talking to my friends at Indivisible and talking to Warren Democrats, we need a constitutional amendment that protects the right of every American citizen to vote and to make sure that vote gets counted. It is the moral necessity of this amendment that keeps us working right now. We must work in this pandemic, but we need to be moving toward a constitutional amendment. The federal government already has the power to regulate elections, to secure our democracy, and to put a stop to racist voter suppression. Let's do that, and let's aim big. Let's get a constitutional amendment to put federal muscle behind making certain that every American citizen has a real opportunity to vote.
Thank you, and absolutely. For next question, for those of us in states that are already have vote by mail and are making plans to ensure safe voting, how can we help people in states that are forcing voters to vote in person or to vote in unsafe conditions?
Okay, so I got a plan for that. If you want to make change, you better have a plan. So in April, I put out a plan to protect our upcoming elections, to keep voters and poll workers safe, and to safeguard our electoral institutions in the long haul. We've got to keep voters healthy by making the process of casting a ballot easier and more accessible, including by giving everyone the option to vote by mail, and by enhancing the safety of in-person voting. So we want to do both these at the same time. I do want to underline that, because poll workers put themselves at increased risk to help keep our democracy functioning. Every poll worker should be compensated for that work, and Congress should guarantee that every poll worker receives hazardous duty pay during this time. Now, if you believe that every citizen should have the right to vote safely, to make sure they can vote and get that vote counted no matter what state they live in, then please make your voice heard. Make calls to elected officials, write a letter to the editor, post on social media. Do whatever you decide to do, but get in this fight. And I'm going to make it really easy for you. Go to elizabethwarren.com/democracy. And we've set it up with lots of different ways that you can get involved in your state. And let me underline this. Even if you have 2 Democratic senators and your representative is Democratic and we're on the side of trying to get more voting, there's still a reason to make your voice heard. We need to raise the temperature on this. We need to make this urgent. We need for everyone in the United States Congress to say voting is important, and it's important that we act now to protect our elections that are coming up in November. So please don't just sit back and say, my guys are good on this. Make sure it's right up there at the top of their priority list. You do that by making your voice heard.
That's exactly right, and that's what we tell folks all the time. Just because you've got 2 Democratic senators and a Democratic congressperson does not mean that they are going to make your issue the top priority. So we all have to be out there letting them know that this is a top priority for protecting our democracy.
So Senator Warren, you'll be hearing from some Indivisibles in Massachusetts about that.
You bet. And you know what? I'm delighted to do it. I mean that, because I have to tell you, back before I was ever in the Senate, I was never quite sure. Does anybody pay attention, when these calls come in and when you get emails and so on? I'm there, and let me tell you, they pay attention. When the phone starts ringing off the hook, when the emails are coming in, when the texts are there, when they're listed on social media, boy, I see my colleagues in the Senate, man, their eyes get big and round, and they say, people care about this. And when people care about this, they say, excuse me, I'd like to be on that bill. Excuse me, I think we better move that one up. No matter what Mitch McConnell is screaming and yelling about, We have to make sure this gets into the package. And that's the power of Indivisible. It's the power of Warren Democrats. It's that I'll be there on the inside. You bet I will. And I'll throw a punch and bite and kick and do everything we have to do to get this done. But we also need from the outside, that power from the outside, that's where real power is.
You're giving us something to fight for. It's no accident that what we are talking about right now is passed in the HEROES Act that came through the House. The blueprint from that came from the vision that you put forward earlier this year, and we really appreciate it because that gives us something to rally around.
Good.
Right. That's right. And now for a topic that's close to Indivisible's hearts, the U.S. Postal Service, which is going to be critical to vote by mail and is struggling due to this pandemic, and recently had a Trump crony appointed to be Postmaster General. How can we make sure the post office is protected despite the hostility of the Trump administration?
So this issue around the post office is really important. The Postal Service is expected to lose billions of dollars in revenue because of the coronavirus outbreak. So instead of trying to help the post office, Donald Trump has threatened to veto any stimulus package that includes help for the post office. Look, we know what's going on here. Trump and the Republicans want to privatize the post office. We cannot let them use this pandemic to further cripple the Postal Service. So let's start with this. We need a qualified Postmaster General who's committed to strengthening the Postal Service and serving our country, not some partisan cheerleader, especially now that we are staring at an election where millions of people may end up voting by mail. Louis DeJoy, I think of him as sort of the Betsy DeVos of the postal system. His appointment just flies in the face of our democratic values. This notion that these important posts just go to people who put big money into Donald Trump's election or into the Republican Party. This is just wrong. So here's how I see it. Congress needs to act swiftly to shore up the Postal Service so that everyone can continue to receive essential medicines and supplies, and so that as many American citizens as possible can vote from home. The HEROES Act has got $25 billion in relief for the Postal Service to get it through this crisis. And that is one of the pieces I'm going to keep fighting for to make sure that this relief stays in the final bill.
Absolutely. And for our last question, now that we are in a world where so much of our activity is virtual, what ways are there to rally public support for protecting elections? And looking forward to Election Day, for those of us who were looking forward to canvassing and campaigning, what's the most effective way to channel that energy and enthusiasm?
So it's a wonderful question. I know this crisis has made it really hard, but it also shows us that the fight for justice across our basic systems is needed now more than ever. Just because we're being safe doesn't mean we have to be silent. So this is the moment. Make your voices heard. Share your stories and your values that you're fighting for on social media. Get out there and talk about what's going on, why you're in this fight, what you're fighting for. Because now more than ever, we've got to elect leaders who believe in putting people first. So if you can, volunteer for candidates. Get out there and offer to do a little, offer to do a lot, whatever it is that you can do. They desperately need help reaching voters. You can do it by calling, you can do it by texting, you can do it by talking to your family and your friends and your neighbors about why it's so important to vote in November. But the urgency of the moment could not be more intense. We need you, and we need you now. So please get in this fight. We'll make it easy for you. ElizabethWarren.com/democracy. Lots of tools. I know Indivisible has lots of tools. Bailey here was getting a drink, just came over. He says there are lots of tools and wants to stay in this. But please, this is the time, and we have to do this one together. It falls to us to save our democracy. And that's what Indivisible is all about. So we're going to stay in this fight together.